Okay, good morning, everyone. And welcome to Innovation Bay's Wednesday event series. I'm your host today, Ian Gardner. I'm a co-founder at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC, an investment partner at Gelix Ventures. So also in the Innovation Bay team, which I just want to give a call out and welcome to, is Faden Stow, who's my co-founder, Shan Priest, who's our GM, and Claire Tester, our event manager. Look, we've been doing this since the week after the lockdown began. So I think this is our sixth. We've had over 2,000 people joining us every week to hear from some of Australia's best VCs. We've had some of the great founders, ecosystem builders and government champions, a bunch of great people on. We've really enjoyed hosting these sessions. We shared war stories, practical tips, a bunch of inspiration, and just, you know, we're really trying to create a sense of community, even when we've all been at home self-isolating. The good news is if you missed any of them or if you're new here, then we have recorded them all. So do check out Innovation Bay's YouTube channel and stay tuned for some upcoming events because we've got early stage investing, the future of the ecosystem, healthcare startups helping to fight COVID and a bunch of other stuff. So always open to suggestions for that. Why are we doing this? Well, Innovation Bay has been around since 2003. We exist, that's how old we are. We exist to help the Australian startup ecosystem thrive. We want to support startups on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond. So running events like this is pretty core to that mission. All of you that are watching are the future of Australia's economy. And that's why more than ever, it's important that we come together, we lift each other up, and we continue to keep our ecosystem moving forward. So three small asks for you today, just before we get into it. Number one, please send us your ideas if you've got any for future speakers and themes. Number two, Innovation Bay is hiring, so it's not all doom and gloom for us. So in Victoria, we are looking for a marketing and membership manager. So if that is you or you know someone, please introduce us. Yeah, you can see the bit.ly links there, hopefully, so have a look at that. Number three, make sure you're a member. So if you haven't signed up, it's free. So just get on, join the mailing list and be part of the community. It's the best way to stay connected with us. We could not do any of this without the support of our sponsors. So a huge thank you to them, AWS, IAG, Farmark Ventures, KPMG, High Growth Ventures, and Macquarie Bank. They are incredible supporters of Innovation Bay and indeed across the ecosystem. And we thank them for the amazing work they do with us. Now, before I introduce Malcolm, I just want to let you all know how the session is going to run. I mean, this has been pretty popular, as you might expect. We've had almost 1,100 registrations. So many of you, helpfully, thank you, have already asked questions of us. So that's great. We're going to start with a few prepared questions from me, but we do encourage you to send questions. We're using Twitter this morning for that. So there's a hashtag online with IB. And we'll try and get Malcolm to answer them as best we can. Right, let me jump to the panel, i.e. Malcolm.
Hi, how are you, Ian?
Yeah, good. Yeah, good to see you. Look, Malcolm, before we start, I'll maybe just give you a really quick bio. I mean, most people will know this, but and very helpfully, you wrote this book, which was great. It must have taken a while, I have to say. But you've been a journalist, a lawyer, a banker, an entrepreneur, an investor, and from 2004 to 2018, a politician, representing the Liberal Party in Sydney's Wentworth constituency. So many of us on the call here, including me, have been your constituents. So thank you for that. During that time, you've been Minister for the Environment and Water under John Howard's government. You were a leader of the party in opposition. Minister for Communications as part of Tony Abbott's government, and then 3 years as Prime Minister from 2015 to 2018. As I said, helpfully you have written a book about this, which I have read and can recommend. It's called The Bigger Picture. I wish every guest we had wrote a book because it's the best prep work I could have done. So thank you for that. Finally, this isn't actually your first Innovation Bay event, Malcolm, as I'm sure you remember. You came along in November 2012. You were the opposition communications spokesman, and you talked to us. So I think it was mostly around the NBN. That was the start of that journey. So yeah, welcome along. Look, let me start with a fairly generic one. So I mean, you've been out of politics really since August 2018 when you stopped being PM. So just quickly, what have you been up to since then? Because we haven't really heard too much about where you are.
Well, I was having a break for a start, and writing this book, but also really getting back into business as both, managing, our investments generically, but more particularly getting back into venture capital. And we've pretty active now. We've done a number of deals. Some of them are public. We participated in the last round of Lucanier's safety culture. We have participated in the public round, most recent public round of Myriota, advanced navigation, really fantastic Australian company that makes, in effect, virtualized gyroscopes, really the best in the world. That's outstanding innovation.
I didn't know there was a thing, a virtualized gyroscope.
Yeah, well, what it does, it's so these guys are two young scientists or engineers from Western Australia, Xavier and Chris, and they have developed these devices and systems, software obviously, which basically in a very compact form, which enable a vehicle, which could be in the air or on the land or underwater, to basically navigate and know where it is without any GPS or any radio communication at all. So in other words, as long as you know where you are to begin with, that's the critical first point. It will then work out where you are, where you're going. And this has got a ton of applications in so many areas. It's really remarkable innovation. Anyway, very so much proud to be able to support them.
There's a ton of questions that we've got that.
Anyway, so the bottom line is we're back in investing, and my passion for business. I've done a lot of different things in business. My passion in business is the creative side of business. I like either starting businesses or co-founding businesses or supporting new businesses. I find that much more interesting than, conventional investing.
Malcolm, I want to make sure that we sort of finish on
keep moving
on the book. And maybe we'll just. I've got one question that came in from a buddy of mine, Rolf Weber. If there's one thing that you'd want your readers to take away from your new book, what would it be?
Innovation, agility. Always be prepared to do something new, and don't accept conventional wisdom.
Yeah. I said in the intro, your career has spanned an incredible wealth of different areas. So journalist, lawyer, entrepreneur, banker, investor, politician. And this actually came in from Anthony Curtin. So another question from the audience. Which area of your career do you think prepared you best for being PM?
That's a very good question. I think probably the time I was working with Packer, oddly enough, because it was highly political. And dealing with very complex political, media, commercial problems all at once. But the truth is that everything prepares you for politics. I mean, the best thing. Look, I was quite unusual in politics, and my critics would say that very loudly. But not least because I got in there when I was 50. While I'd always had an interest in politics, I was not someone who had been working in a politician's office or as an official in a trade union. I wasn't an apparatchik. And so I had a whole career in business behind me. And so that meant I was very often thought about things and approached things in quite a different way to most politicians.
Yeah.
So, I was more interested in the policy and the outcome than I was in the politics of politics.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that there's been quite a few journalists have been successful prime minister. I mean, I think UK, like Churchill, I think made his name as a wartime journalist before he became a politician, and then Boris Johnson basically spent his career as a journalist before he moved to politics. So I'm sure there's other examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference, though, I mean, I've obviously have been a journalist, but you know, Boris is someone who literally that's what he did before he went to politics. That's all he'd done. Journalism was, you know, one thing I had done, and it was you know, part of my experience. That wasn't my profession.
Well, it's obviously helped with your writing. I mean, you turned out an amazing 680-page memoir, which in a year it seems, which is just remarkable. So you can obviously write quickly.
Yeah, well, as long as you find it readable. The important thing is it's got to be entertaining and interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, maybe this is the last point in the book. I actually found the part, maybe it's just me personally, but the part pre-politics I found more fascinating than the politics part. I mean, the politics part, it kind of culminates in, you know, it's like a Tarantino movie, culminates in this sort of incredible scene of violence at the end.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk about startups. I don't want to dwell too much in politics. I think our audience is here to hear about startups. So, I mean, they are a central feature of your story. I think probably the first famous one for you is AusieMail back in the 90s. So great Australian startup. You joined as an investor and executive, I think. So you put five, and I think
well, it was really. I mean, it was Sean Howard, who was, you know, just a relentless innovator, and he taught me. I mean, it was Sean's idea, and Sean had got started in computer magazines, and I got to know him through Consolidated Press because they were shareholders in his magazine business, and he had this big idea for an ISP, and Trevor Kennedy and I both invested $500,000 in it. I wasn't an executive per se. I was the chairman, but very actively involved. And I think probably the best way to describe it is, you know, ultimately, Sean was the the visionary, the ideas person, the chief executive. Then a lot of the general manager role was handed over to David Spence, who's a very experienced entrepreneur, has supported him very well. And my main role was getting the deals done. So I was like the in-house investment banker. Yeah, and you know, at that time in a business like that was very important. And you know, getting the company floated in the US was a big challenge. But the interesting thing to reflect on was that in the mid-90s, you could not raise 10 cents for an Australian tech company here. Yeah. Literally, it was impossible. And I had a lot of other deals on the go, and one was a gold mining project in Siberia, right? Which, I mean, you literally could tick every single box of risk. You know, law, not so much. Large people with guns wandering around trying to kill you, tick, tick. You know, it was just literally as risky. And Sean used to say, how can it be that you can raise money for this gold project in Siberia, but we can't raise any money for our business, which is effectively a telco. It's got real customers. It's got real revenues. It's a real business. But that was how technophobic Australian investors were in the 90s. And, you know, you fast forward to where we are now, boy, it's a transformation.
No, it's definitely improved, and it's been great. I mean, finishing the AusieMail story, your 500K investment turned into $60 million.
Yeah, about 60 million, yeah.
Which is fantastic.
It was a good return.
So, yeah, great outcome. But let me just finish that first question bubble. So, I mean, why are startups so important to Australia's future? And then we'll dig into some specifics.
Well, they're absolutely critical because the innovation, wind back up a bit, you know, innovation is critical to our future. We have to have a culture of innovation, and that's not just for startups, that is for big companies, for governments. You know, you've got to have that attitude that says we are not going to assume that the way we do things tomorrow should be the way we do things today, right? Yeah. And so if you're not innovative, you'll fall behind. Innovation is the key to productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So why are startups so good? There is basically no losers from startups other than investors who, if they lose their money, the people, the entrepreneurs, learn, even if the startup fails, learn an enormous amount. The employees, the team learn an enormous amount, and they all get paid something, not very much, but they very often, but they get paid something, and they pay tax and all that stuff. But it basically is a way of just improving, even if a startup is unsuccessful, and most are, in the sense that they don't meet the expectations founders. That doesn't mean they're a failure. The startup ecosystem is absolutely critical to having that culture of innovation, which is vital for a competitive modern economy. So, I know that a lot of people in politics, who, frankly don't get this generally, used to criticize me for talking about innovation and say, oh, that frightens people and so forth. And I mean, the government never mentions innovation anymore because they think it scares people. They'd rather try and tell everyone that, everything's going to be the same, which is increasingly difficult to maintain, of course, given what we're going through. But, the bottom line is that without innovation, you don't get productivity improvements. Without that, your economy will go backwards. Then you end up no longer being able to be a high wage, economy with a tax base that enables you to have a generous social welfare safety net. So, unless you embrace innovation, the times that, all of the change that we're surrounded by will just overwhelm us and leave us behind.
All right, there's a ton of questions came in advance about things that you're focused on now, and I guess things that are close to your heart. Let me just run through some things you did when you were PM, National Innovation and Science Agenda, which was great. The climate change stuff, I think you said in the conclusion that one of your main regrets has been the lack of progress in Australia and indeed globally to address this. One of the notable wins was you kickstarted Snowy Hydro 2.0 and Tasmania's Battery of the Nation, which are essentially giant $5 billion plus batteries, which a lot of people maybe don't understand. The question here is what sectors are you keen to invest in? We talked about Mariota, we talked about safety culture. Now there's a bunch of people, let me just rattle off some of the people asked this question. So Jordan Minos, Parth Arora, Scott Rydell, Louise McElvogue, I don't know if you know Louise, Mark Tompkins, and then there's a bunch around the renewable stuff from Jeremy Little and a few others. So take this as what are you interested in?
Well, look, I've been very interested in critical technologies. So we've been looking at a number of opportunities in the cybersecurity area. We're very, very keen on that field. I am very keenly interested in clean tech and renewables. I haven't really found a great investment for me in that field yet, because a lot of the renewables projects now are really sort of they're big leveraged investments for institutions.
Infrastructure deals.
Yeah, I haven't been a completely hopeless investor in real estate, but I'm not great at it. The more luck than good management, I think. So my skill as an investor, just cutting to the chase, has not been in public markets. It has been turning an unlevered dollar into $10 or $20. Not, borrowing $9, putting in $1 of my own to make 10, and then, selling it for $1 for $12. So I'm more of the area that interests me and where I've had more success has really been at the pointier end of investment. So that's what I'm really interested in people and technologies and businesses that are capable of disruption. That's what I
It
like.
definitely feels that there's a theme through, I mean, whether it's Mariota or to a degree safety culture, but you talk about cybersecurity, there's a theme of almost deep tech running through all this. So, and I guess the question for it.
There's a couple of deals we're doing which I can't talk about now because they're, they're not public, but we've made about five or six investments of substance in the last 9 months, I suppose, and we've got another 3 or 4 in the pipeline at the moment.
And is it fair to say they're deep tech or?
Yeah, generally, yeah.
All right. So if
I mean, I'm not running a fund. I mean, I'm not. So I can basically suit myself, but I'm more interested in as I said, in the technologies that are most disruptive. That's the thing I'm most interested in. That the businesses that are going to really shake the established order.
And what would you suggest if there's an amazing founder listening right now who's got a great deep tech idea? How do they get in touch with you?
As my late father would have said, I'm as easy to get as a packet of Rothmans, which of course is now impossible to get. But
if you get them,
I'm easy. You can find me. I mean, I'll give you my email address. It's been the same for decades. It's malcolm@turnbull.com.au. So
there you go.
That's about as easy. You don't have to be a code breaker to work that one out.
Yeah. Look, before we jump off this topic, I just want to ask about 5G.
Yes.
So you were obviously involved in communications, Aussie Mill at the start, NBN all the way through. It was a passion of yours, but talk to us about 5G. Is it a game changer?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the critical thing about 5G is that it is not so much that the data rate is increased. In other words, that the volume of data. I mean, one of the things. I'll give one of my little bugbears. We talk about the speed. We say, you've got 100 megs, I've got 50 megs, therefore your connection's twice the speed. The truth is that the speeds are the same. It's actually the volume of data that is really talking about. But anyway, we'll now go back to talking about speed, because otherwise people won't know what we're talking about. The real change the big change, I think, with 5G, and there'll be people on this call that know a lot more about it than me, I'm sure, is the reduction in latency, which is vitally important for the whole, Internet of Things. Billions of sensors, devices that are being controlled in real time remotely. So reducing latency is vital. Now, how do you do that? One of the ways you do that is by distributing the intelligence, the switching, authentication, routing, capabilities of the network through the network. This is achieved by virtualization in large part. And so instead of having a traditional edge and core, a sort of relatively dumb radio access network at the edge routing traffic into a central core, computer and processing capacity in the center, which then, routes, verifies, permits lawful intercept, all of those things, and then hands the traffic off somewhere else, sends the signals off somewhere else. It's being done in a distributed way, and that makes that from a security point of view makes it much harder to draw the distinction that we used to draw in the past between the edge and the core, and that's why we prohibited what we called high-risk vendors, which for practical purposes meant Chinese government or Chinese-owned telecom equipment suppliers, notably Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah. All right. Let's not go down the potential 5G China trap. So I want to get onto a few more topics.
Yeah.
So look, this one's, I mean, it's a sensitive one, I think, but it's critical in the startup world, which is, especially now. I mean, part of our focus on these calls have been about checking in with people and just making sure that they're okay. But mental health, mental health in startups, and you know, I hope I'm not overstepping the mark because you've talked about it publicly, but you talked about depression and even suicidal thoughts, especially after you were first deposed as opposition leader in 2010. It's a big issue for our industry. I mean, the crushing pressure that I'm sure you felt and that founders feel every day can be terrible. Any advice for the audience in this one? It's such an important issue. How can we best deal with it?
Well, I'd say, Ian, I think the most important thing, you know, is to be alert to your mental health. You know, we're all hopefully reasonably alert to our physical health. You know, I mean, if your back hurts, you can't help noticing that. And, you know, if you can't do your pants up, you realize you've been eating too many hamburgers and pizzas. But we're not aware enough generally of our mental health. And it is very easy if you're not, and this is exactly what happened to me, for depression to sort of ambush you, you know, for the black dog to leap out from the bushes and knock you over.
Yeah.
And I found myself, you know, really in the darkest, blackest situation, you know, where I could not get these thoughts of, you know, killing myself out of my head, basically. And it was a very, very tough period. And, I decided to get out of Parliament, then I decided to stay in. I was all over the place. So it's important, I think, to check in with yourself. If you're starting to feel down, get out, go for a walk, you know, and particularly in the startup area, you know, don't, you know, get yourself bent out of shape if your business, if your project doesn't fulfill your expectations. I mean, most don't. You know, the truth is you learn more from things not, you know, you learn more from failure, quote unquote, it's a word I hate, than success, you know, because the truth is if a bunch of us go and come up with an idea, we started, it's a huge success, we sell it for a fortune, we're all going to be too busy popping the champagne to actually work out what we did right. But if something screws up and fails, then you generally do a post-mortem, right? And so you learn a lot from that. But you can't, it's very easy to pour so much of yourself into your job, into your project, into your business, that you feel that if my business doesn't succeed, if my business fails, then I am a failure as well. And so you've got to really separate that. But above all, work to, you know, make sure you're staying in a positive mood. So simple things, you know, get outside, go for a walk in the sun. Anyway, I talk about it in the book, but it's a huge issue. I think also what you said, Ian, earlier is very important. Check in with people.
Yeah, and in some ways that's hard. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I wear a Fitbit, and my step count since I've been locked down is about 30% down. I mean, I'm still doing a ton of exercise. Anyone knows me, so I love that. But you know,
you have a lean and hungry look about you.
No, I think that's just getting old and losing hair. But yeah, look, when your step count's down, you kind of got to force yourself to get out, and it's hard, but it's so important. Look, just while I remember, a quick call out. We are still getting questions on the Twitter hashtag, so hashtag online with IB. So keep coming, and Shan is going to throw them my way. Look, thank you, Malcolm. I think that's such a major issue, and I think you addressed it brilliantly there. So I want to talk about COVID-19. I mean, it's you know, your book came out. I think you wrote the postscript in early January, so it's still relatively hot off the press. There was only one mention of it in your book. It's not even in the index, because I went to find the mention of it, couldn't see it. And it's kind of hit the world faster and harder than anyone really anticipated. So first question, should we all inject ourselves with bleach? Second question, I know, unbelievable. Second question, how should we be thinking about the post-COVID future from here? Sorry, just
Well,
maybe before you do that, let me just.
Firstly, I want to.
Yeah,
Firstly, can I say hi to one of the former Aussie Mail directors? There may be others on, but Steve Ezzies from New York, who's locked down in Connecticut. Steve's been a great friend and partner in many entrepreneurial adventures over the years. It's good to see he's online. Look, well, obviously drinking bleach is a very, very, very bad idea. So do not do that. Look, I think, look, let me deal with the changes that I think are going to happen. And I'll put this up for discussion. I've got a sort of and beginnings of an analytical framework to look at what it's all going to mean. And I'm dividing businesses and industries into two parts. Those where existing trends will be accelerated, like, video conferencing, remote working, e-commerce, obviously all of that will be accelerated. Now, what that means is that the trend that's been bad for, say, commercial real estate, for bricks and mortar retail, is going to be accelerated. The trend, you've got to ask, how long you want to be office space going forward. Is we going to, are you going to, with more or less ubiquitous broadband, the ability to, work from home or work anywhere has become real. And it's been real for a while, but this has sort of made a lot of people try it out for a sustained period. Then there's okay, so that's one bucket. And the other bucket is, what are the areas where existing trends will be disrupted or maybe even reversed? And, I've been thinking a lot about what the implications of this means for density and for cities. I mean, I'm a great believer in cities. I'm a great believer and supporter of mass transit. But, is density, which we always thought to be the solution, not the problem, is it going to become, people going to start heading out to the suburbs again? I saw one of the bank CEOs was talking about, instead of having, most of their people in, a big office building, actually spreading them out. And of course, that's just, basically that's like having your data stored in multiple data centers, because you're basically saying, if I've got, 5,000 employees in one building, and there's a virus outbreak there, then they all get infected, that's a disaster. If I've got 500 people in each of 10 buildings, then if one of them gets infected, well, that's bad news, but it's only 10% of the total workforce. So anyway, I think so I think the changes are going to be substantial. The existing trends that I've mentioned, a couple, are being accelerated, will undoubtedly be so.
Yeah.
But what's more interesting is what is going to actually change. Where are the trends that are going, the new trends will emerge, or old trends that will be reversed?
Yeah. No, great comments on that. There's been a few events recently where our guests have talked about the concept of wartime CEO versus peacetime CEO.
Yeah.
And the current crisis we're in with, when the shit hit the fan back in mid-March, everyone sort of didn't know what was happening, and they kind of immediately went into wartime mode. And some of the bigger startups were like, this is fantastic because we're back in the lean, hungry, innovate quickly, move fast and break things days, which, we kind of had moved out of gradually.
Yeah.
And I guess, you were definitely a peacetime, and I'm thinking more of your time as PM. So you were a peacetime CEO, apart from the brutal politics of it all. But, when you look at
feel like it at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't. But when you look at the current crisis, I mean, Scott Morrison is now definitely a wartime CEO. Would you have liked to have been there and done that and been that?
Oh yeah. Oh, look, I would love to. I'd love to be, still PM and grappling with these issues. I mean, what's always, I've always found most interesting the most complex challenges. So, Julie always used to say that I only liked, I was keen on innovation because I got bored quickly.
Julie Bishop.
Julie Bishop, yeah. But it's, I think it's, there's a bit of truth in that. So I think this is a very challenging, very interesting time. And it's a great, Scott has a great responsibility and a great privilege to be leading the country at this time. Having said that, I don't want to sound bleak here, but in many respects, the hardest part of this challenge is what comes next. The government responses to the pandemic have been fairly consistent around the world in the sense that they've involved social distancing, quarantines, and all the related responses, wage subsidies. And those countries that got onto it quickly fared better than those that lagged or were in denial for a while, like the US, being good/bad example. But the real challenge is, how do you get the economy going again, and how do you deal with those sectors that are going to be, arguably permanently impaired? I mean, I think, bricks and mortar retail. I mean, that's one of the, retail is one of the biggest employers. How do you fire that up again? I mean, we've got shopping strips and malls in Australia that have been, barely, almost empty or partially empty for some time now. What's going to happen? Is that's only going to get worse, and that's just one part of it. So, I think there's a lot of grief to come, and regrettably, economically, and the solutions, the answers are not immediately obvious.
Yeah.
That's to say, the answers to the economic challenges are less obvious than the answers to the pandemic challenges, which were obvious, but having said that, some countries failed to take them up.
Yeah, but there's a sort of follow-on question from that, which came in from Chris Mazurek, and a few other people have asked around this. So Jaya Huja and Samantha Weinreich. Do you feel that post-pandemic, our political and corporate leaders will be more open to taking greater risks around innovation?
Well, I would like to think they will. I'm not very confident that they will, though. There's a whole bunch of look. Most people in politics are quite uncomfortable with innovation and change. I mean, technologically, generally, government is very, behind. I, did a number of things to catch up, the Digital Transformation Agency and, a lot of other initiatives, putting so much government data, making it open, open access, particularly the geospatial data. So we did, I did a lot of stuff there, but the culture is the hardest thing to change. I think one of the biggest problems that you have in government, and you see this in a lot of big companies too, it's very similar culture, is the blame-based culture. Hierarchical blame-based cultures are really bad. Organizations should be as flat and collaborative as you can manage. And if you have a culture which says, if you make a mistake, you will get, if you do something which doesn't work, you will get smashed. If you do something which is successful, your superior will claim the credit. The rational actor then decides to do nothing. And that's one of the reasons bureaucracies are so inert very often. This whole cult of the consultant, apologies to the consultants on the call, but the cult of the consultant has been disastrous for the quality of the public service, because so much of the core business of the public service is being outsourced to consultants. And part of that is in order to avoid making a decision themselves. So instead of saying, yes, we decided to do X, Y, Z, we say, oh, we sought advice from KPMG / McKinsey / Price Waterhouse, whatever, and they advised us to do this. And so then you can blame them. And, I give a good example of in the technology area or, IT area in the book with the failure of the census, that crash of the census a few years back, which was entirely the fault of IBM. Okay. And, they fessed up, they failed to do what they were contracted to do. It was really bad show on their part, and they fessed up and paid up and all that stuff. But who got the blame? Who got the blame? Who wore the heat? It was the government, and in particular, as the buck always ends on the Prime Minister's desk, right? So that was a lesson, and but I used that inside government to say, don't think you can avoid responsibility by outsourcing stuff to some big name.
Yeah, I think that's
so. I hope what you've got to do, you've got to set expectations, and again, you'll see this in the book in the discussion about innovation. I mean, when I launched the innovation agenda with Christopher Pine, there were a bunch of, it had a lot of, I think there's 25 measures in it. And someone or other said, do you guarantee these will work? And I said, no, I don't. I said, some of them may not work. But these are all the best ideas we've got at the moment. If something doesn't work, we'll stop doing it. If something does work, we'll do more of it. And if we find someone else achieving the same objectives more effectively, we'll shamelessly plagiarize them.
Yeah.
I hasten to add, you can do that in public policy. Please don't do that with intellectual property. But plagiarism being the sincerest form of flattery. But that's what you got to do. So you got to set expectations. And what you see leaders doing this at the moment, and it's sensible. They're basically saying, some more bluntly than others, we are in uncharted waters. We're acting on the best advice, but we reserve the right to change our policies depending on, facts, events, and the advice. And I think you got to do that. This is a dynamic situation, and that's really just it's a big example of the tenor of the times in which we live, which is of heightened volatility.
All right, we're coming on 8:43, 8:44, so I want to get a ton of topics and questions coming in. So kind of linked to that one, but startup policy. So, we've got a, using quote marks, lobby group called Startup Oz. It's not quite the Rules Council. I guess the question, well, I'll get the question in a sec. So, Scott Morrison famously came into Parliament brandishing a lump of coal. What's it going to take for Morrison now to come in brandishing a lump of quantum computing or whatever the equivalent is? Do we need a stronger lobby group?
Well, I think Startup Oz does well. I think it needs to be. You probably need to amp up your representation. Let me give you a bit of.
It does feel that they're underfueled.
Yeah, let me give you a bit of quality advice on lobbying in Canberra. Smaller businesses, and particularly startups, really struggle in Canberra. The people that do best in lobbying are the big companies and their representatives, because in many respects it's the same culture. It's the same bureaucrats talking to other bureaucrats. Startups have to do is, clearly the problem is, if you are running a startup, you don't have the time to be going down to Canberra. If you're going down to Canberra all the time to talk to politicians and bureaucrats, your business is going to be, fall by the wayside. So, but I think we do need a stronger voice, stronger voices for innovation. And that really is going to require mobilizing media, particularly digital media, to get behind that. It is, you've got a real problem that you have, big business is often not particularly supportive because they've vested interests. You've got the media, particularly the Murdoch media, is so antagonistic to science. You know, the war on climate science from the right-wing media in Australia is one of the biggest problems we have.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And you know, that is, you know, there's a lot about that in my book, but you know, we are paying, as indeed the Americans are, quite a heavy price for that.
Yeah. I want to make sure I'm calling out some of the people asking those questions. So that question of policy came from Justin Webb and Alana Zhu.
Yeah. Hi, Justin.
Yeah, I'm sure you know him.
I know a few of these people. Yeah,
I'm sure you do. And there's someone else that you might know. So this question, I mean, there's kind of a question. I mean, Doron Ben Mayer, who you may know as well, has asked this one, and it's about, you know, people of substance. You know, I'd class you as someone of substance. You come from a non-political background. Mike Cannon-Brookes, who I'm sure you know, is incredibly influential. I mean, right now he's got a bunch of power, but not necessarily the responsibility to voters. You know, would you encourage Mike or people like that to become a politician? Mike for PM?
Question? Yeah. Well, I think, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, sorry, excuse me. I would, look, I wouldn't discourage anyone from going into politics. I'd think pretty carefully about it, though. There's a lot of implications, particularly in terms of your family, that come about with it. It's not, federal politics is pretty tough on families, particularly people with small children, and very tough on your spouse, who sort of ends up becoming a single parent, generally. Look, I think that you've got to get organised. I mean, if you want to affect political change, ultimately, the only way you can achieve that is at the ballot box. So you've basically got to get people elected that will support the things you want to have supported, and get defeated the people that oppose, you know, the values that you're trying to promote. That's what democracy is all about. So, you know, and that means getting mobilized, getting professional, getting organized. I mean, the one thing that will make politicians move is the fear of electoral loss. And you know, a lot of professional politicians basically don't believe in anything much. You know, might have a few prejudices and
except their own self-preservation.
Correct. Exactly right. They believe in winning elections. So if they feel that they're going to lose an election, and you know, which basically means losing, you know, in enough marginal seats to lose government, then they'll be motivated. I mean, you look at, and people can do that. You can be, you know, look at what Zali Steggall did in Warringah. Now, obviously, Abbott was, you know, poisonously unpopular there, but it was a very safe Liberal seat, and he got punted out of there. You look at, you know, Beck Sharkey in Mayo. You look at Indi. I mean, Indi is a very interesting example. So there's a seat, you know, which is just south of the New South Wales border. It had been, you know, rock solid Conservative seat forever. The local member, Liberal woman called Sophie Mirabella, very right wing, pretty, you know, aggressive personality, I would say, and sort of often abrasive, you know, very tough, hard right's not the right thing, but, you know, very right wing personality, right?
Yeah.
She alienated enough of her voters that they put in Cathy McGowan, and who is essentially a smaller Liberal, you know, and not a radical lefty or anything like that, smaller Liberal. Cathy goes in 13, the local Liberal Party branches then re-endorse Sophie, right? Because what's happened is the party in Indi has become, the more moderate people have left. They've been sort of driven out or discouraged. So they re-endorse Sophie, whereupon Cathy gets re-elected with an increased majority. And of course now Helen Haines is there. So, you know, the bottom, you know, the bottom line is that even in very safe seats, and the same is true with the Labor Party. You look at Adam Bant in the seat of Melbourne as a Green. These big monolithic parties can be challenged, but the political action needs to be very targeted. So the bottom line is you've either got to persuade people in the big parties or the big parties to support you, or be prepared to take them on. And if ultimately they will get the message.
Yeah.
I'm firmly of the view that the swing to the right in the coalition, and in its membership very often, will be politically self-defeating. But of course, if your opponents are hopeless enough, you'll still win. This is the other thing that's critically important to understand about politics. It's like football. You may be the worst team in the competition, or so you think. You can't kick, you can't catch, you're just dreadful. But if the people you play on Saturday are even more dreadful than you still win. Yeah. And so, you look at the UK election. I mean, Corbyn made Labor unelectable, right? Shorten, wouldn't say he made Labor unelectable here, but there are a number of features to Labor's campaign which were just so much self-harm and predictably self-harming that, as I say in the book, in 2019, Labor lost the election that the coalition didn't deserve to win. And that's not, I voted for the coalition, but I'm not, a creature of habit. But I'm just, that is a fair objective assessment. Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is, ultimately, you've got to affect votes. That's the only way to make things happen.
All right, let's thank you. Let's rattle through a few more topics. I wanted to touch on superannuation. The venture capital industry has benefited pretty greatly from the influx of super, especially Host Plus. Yeah. At the same time, part of the government's COVID response policy has been, hey, if you're a super holder, you can take 10 grand or 20 grand. I can't remember the exact number. Maybe it's 20 over 2 years out. Average balance of 30 grand in a Host Plus super account. There's possibly a liquidity problem. We run a news podcast every week. We did one on Monday, and Daniel Petrie, when I asked him about this, he said, the idea of letting people pull money out of super is manifestly brain dead. So it's a broad question, but what role should super play in the startup ecosystem? And are you worried about the short-term liquidity for the most active venture investors from that sector?
Yeah, well, I absolutely, I agree with Daniel. I really think it's a bad idea to allow people to pull super out, at that early stage. The whole point of it is to, build up a retirement, an amount for people to have at retirement. And, that's the reason why, and I go through this in the book, there was a time when Scott was very keen to allow people to access their super for a home deposit. And, we didn't do that, and for precisely the same reason. Super should stick to its purpose, okay? In terms of super funds investing in venture capital, Host Plus has been a leader there, and that's fantastic. Others are following. I think in large part that was a consequence of the national innovation and science agenda. We had a lot of important measures, the tax breaks, the special funds, the insolvency reforms, there's a host of them, as you know. But I think one of the best things was using the bully pulpit, the megaphone of the Prime Minister's office to talk about innovation. And the more we talked about innovation, the more trustees of big funds were saying, gosh, everyone's talking about innovation. What are we doing on innovation? Well, nothing actually. Okay, all right. So we seriously just buying index funds? Yes, we are basically. Well, let's put some money into innovation. And I think that is critically important. The super governments have never really required, and it's a very slippery slope to go down this one. So I just want to flag it. Governments have never required super funds to invest in anything in particular, because the object has been obviously to maximise returns for the members.
Yeah.
But super is immensely tax advantaged, as you know. I mean, I wound back some of the benefits for the very, for the wealthier members of the community, much to the dismay of many Liberal Party members, but it is still a very, very tax advantaged area. And, they should, if I was, a trustee of a big super fund, I would be very conscious of the need to be seen to be supporting Australian innovation, not just for economic reasons, but also to bolster up the social license that super needs to have to maintain its advantaged position.
Okay, and that question, by the way, came in from Carl Claringbold. So thank you, Carl. Let's take a couple more. I think we've got a few minutes. So it came in from Eliza Jackson from MacDoc. What do you think the number one priority for the Australian tech sector should be today?
Oh,
you've only got one.
Just success. Just keep just keep having a go, and don't be put off by setbacks. And that's the most important thing. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of something not working. You just got to keep on going.
All right, I've got to be careful how I say this name because it might set off my home device. But Alexa Thompson, why does Australia struggle with commercialization of our own R&D versus importing existing business models? How can we? So
well, it's a
story.
Look, I think it's a cultural thing. We addressed that in the NISA, addressed the problem, and changed the grant. Government grant rules in a way that was designed to encourage universities and other primary research institutions to commercialise and to have industry partners. I think the CSIRO under Larry Marshall has really stepped up to that in particular, and Main Sequence Ventures, which is a deep science VC fund, has done very well there, and we've made a few investments with them. And also I think Data 61, which was the result. It was when NICTA. I mean, for some reason or other, Abbott and Credlin were determined to defund NICTA as one of the. I have no idea why, but anyway, we sort of Ian McFarlane and I managed to save it by. Putting it into CSIRO, where I think it has done very well, and Data 61 has been a real great example of how you commercialise deep science with real live industrial applications. But we need to do a lot more of that. The VC sector, of course, is leading the charge here as well, because the more Australian venture capital you've got that available for innovative businesses and technologies, the more commercialisation you will get by definition get. But it's I think it's largely a cultural thing, I think, is the answer.
Malcolm, we're just about, we are kind of out of time, but let's make sure we finish on maybe a high note with a quick question, quick answer if we can. This is from Simone Gwynn. So thank you, Simone. You get the last question. What needs to happen in the coming decade to set up the Australian innovation ecosystem for future global success?
I think encouragement from governments. I don't think there's a lot of legislative change that's needed, but if there are, they just should be delivered. I think just enthusiasm. David Shane, who I don't know whether David's on the call, but David's very experienced technology investor, and successful one over many years.
Our innovation fund.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah, very smart guy. David was saying to me the other day that I'm sure he doesn't mind me repeating it, but I am, I'm a former politician, so indiscreet. But he was saying to me the other day that the Australian tech sector today, the ecosystem here today, is comparable to Israel. And I was staggered by that. And, you know, and he ran through a few numbers and you know, he looked at the big companies that have emerged from it in recent years, the unicorns that we've talked about. I mean, we are no longer the techno desert in financial terms we were back in the 90s, you know, when Steve Ezzies helped us float Aussie Mail on the in the US market. So I think we're doing well, but we just have to keep it up. And I mean, and politicians, the message I'd send to politicians is don't be shy about talking about innovation. You know, it is, every time the people with the biggest megaphones are our political leaders, and they should talk about the importance of innovation and recognize that it isn't just cyber. It isn't just, you know, software. It's everywhere. You know, it is in every part of our economy. You want to encourage a culture of innovation, a culture that says we're not going to do things, necessarily going to do things tomorrow in the way we did things today. And I mean, and you know, the bottom line is we're living in a time of unprecedented change, both in scale and pace, never more so than today with, you know, this COVID crisis. We either take advantage of that volatility or it just runs over the top of us. So, you know, there's really only two options. The one thing that's not going to happen is the world's going to stay the same. We may decide to do nothing, but everything else will be changing. Yeah. So that's really the political imperative.
Okay, Malcolm, we are a couple of minutes over. So
okay.
I want to say thank you. We just got a couple of slides to finish off, and then we're done. So before we finish, we've got a few events coming up. So tomorrow we've got Innovation Bay with AWS, and we've got Rachel Newman asking Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap. Apparently their sales went up 800% in a day, about toilet paper shortages and paying it forward using COVID. Then next Wednesday, we are doing another one of these. We're handing the mic over to Al Coleman from Tempest Partner, who is going to chat about challenges, relationships, and growth with Manuri and Eric from Health Match and Swoop Aero. So that should be fascinating. Third episode, as I mentioned, of our news special, Open the Pod Bay Doors, which is a great podcast we do, has just come out. We had Daniel Petrie, Rachel Newman, and Anthony Ceravolo. Lots of topics covered, so take a listen and check out all the other episodes we do. So it's, you know, we're biased, but we think it's a pretty good podcast. So thanks again to our sponsors, Macquarie Bank, KPMG, High Growth Ventures, AWS, and Farmark Ventures. And I think that is it. Malcolm, really appreciate you taking time out. I know you're a busy man. I think you kept us a little bit nervous. I think you were on a radio show this morning. Was it Alan Jones you were chatting to this morning for us?
Yes, we're just schmoozing every morning.
Well, look, thank you. Thanks for writing your book. It's really good. So I would recommend people getting into it. But thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. And we'll see you again next time.
Bye.